The rain came down in sheets, the kind that made the world blur into a dull silver curtain. Robert Langston gripped the steering wheel of his black Bentley, jaw tight, eyes flicking from the road to the dashboard warning light that had just blinked to life. He was late for a dinner meeting in Atlanta, one that would seal a deal worth more than most people made in a lifetime. He could already imagine the headlines: Langston Development expands southward, another triumph for the man who had built an empire from polished concrete and ambition. Then came the jolt, a sickening thump, a pull to the right, the unmistakable grind of rubber surrendering to metal. The car lurched before he managed to guide it to the shoulder of the deserted highway. He slammed the door open and stepped out, his Italian loafers sinking into mud. Cold rain hit him like needles. Unbelievable, he muttered, glaring at the deflated tire. The Bentley looked pitiful now, a wounded beast. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course, the one stretch of road between cities where his network failed him. Robert cursed under his breath, trying to remember the last time he'd even changed a tire. Years ago, maybe. Back before chauffeurs, back before private jets. He popped the trunk and found the spare and jack, but the rain made everything slippery, his expensive coat heavy with water. He crouched, struggling with the lug nuts, hands trembling with cold and frustration. Each attempt only smeared more grease across his cuff. "This is ridiculous," he hissed. "I pay people for this." Headlights flashed in the distance, and he straightened, waving instinctively. The vehicle wasn't a car. It was two flickering bicycle lights, swaying closer through the rain. He frowned. Two kids emerged from the mist, their bikes squeaking, their shoes splashing through puddles. They couldn't have been older than 14. The taller one wore a faded red hoodie, hood up, face mostly hidden. The younger had a plastic bag tied over his head like a makeshift hat, rain dripping down his cheeks. They stopped a few feet away, catching their breath. "You okay, sir?" the older one asked. His voice was calm, steady, carrying that polite southern tone that made Robert hesitate. "Flat tire," Robert said shortly, gesturing toward the Bentley. "And no signal." The younger boy grinned. "That's bad luck right there." "Yeah, no kidding," Robert muttered, turning back to the wheel. "I've got it handled." But the older boy didn't move. He crouched beside the car, peering at the tire. "You got the jack under right?" he asked. "Looks like it's slipping in the mud." Robert blinked. "Excuse me." Without waiting for permission, the boy repositioned the jack, pressing his foot down to steady it. His brother held a small flashlight, its beam trembling but focused. The two worked together like they'd done this before, trading short, quiet comments. Robert found himself stepping back, more out of surprise than discomfort. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked after a minute. "Helped our uncle at his shop sometimes," the older boy said. "Ain't hard once you get the hang of it." Robert watched them, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. Their clothes were soaked through, their hands red from cold. The younger one shivered but kept the flashlight steady. The older boy loosened the final lug nut and nodded to Robert. "You can put the spare on now." It took another 10 minutes, but by the end, the Bentley stood firm on a new tire. Robert wiped his face, breathing hard. The rain had softened into a mist, the sound of it steady on the asphalt. "Well," he said awkwardly, "thanks. I don't think I'd have gotten that done without you two." The older boy just smiled, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Ain't no problem, sir. We were just on our way home anyway." Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, peeling off a couple of $100 bills. "Here," he said, extending the cash. "Take this. Go get yourselves something to eat, or new jackets." The younger boy's eyes widened, but before he could reach for it, his brother placed a hand on his arm. "Nah, we can't take that," he said firmly. "Mama says you help people 'cause it's right, not for money." Robert froze, the bills fluttering slightly in the breeze. For a moment, all he could hear was the faint patter of rain and the distant hum of highway noise. The sincerity in the boy's voice, the quiet pride, it cut through something in him. He lowered his hand slowly. "You sure?" he asked quietly. The boy nodded. "Yes, sir." Robert managed a faint, incredulous smile. "You two are something else." They grinned, waved, and mounted their bikes again, the flashlight swinging as they pedaled off down the wet road. He stood there watching until their red taillights faded into the rain, two small flickers swallowed by the night. When he finally climbed back into his car, he didn't start the engine right away. The luxury interior felt strange, too clean, too soft. He just sat there, staring through the windshield, thinking about two boys with nothing who had still given freely. For the first time in a long while, Robert Langston, millionaire, mogul, man of success, felt the heavy, humbling weight of gratitude. The sound of rain still echoed in Robert's ears long after he'd driven away. The wipers swished rhythmically, pushing aside the mist that lingered on the windshield, but his thoughts refused to clear as easily. He couldn't stop replaying the scene. Two boys in soaked hoodies, their laughter cutting through the storm, their small hands tightening bolts on a car that cost more than their family's entire neighborhood. The way the older one had said it, "Mama says you help people 'cause it's right, not for money." It was so simple, so sure. And somehow, it made him feel wrong. He turned off the radio when a news anchor's voice broke through the silence. He didn't want noise. He wanted to think. For years, he'd been the kind of man who measured worth in deals closed, square footage built, zeros added to his bank account. He'd clawed his way up from a childhood where every penny mattered, promising himself he'd never be poor again. And he wasn't. He'd won, in every visible way. But for the first time, that victory felt strangely hollow. By the time he reached the city limits, the rain had stopped, and the clouds were thinning, leaving streaks of pale silver in the night sky. He pulled into a gas station and sat there for a while, engine running. The attendant recognized the Bentley immediately and hurried over. "Evenin', Mr. Langston. Everything all right?" "Yeah," Robert said automatically. Then, glancing at his reflection in the rearview mirror, he saw the mud spattered across his collar, the faint tremor in his hands. He looked human, and he didn't like it. "Actually," he muttered, "just had a flat." The attendant chuckled. "That's bad luck for a man with wheels like that." Robert didn't answer. He paid for gas, but his thoughts stayed behind on that dark stretch of highway, with the boys who had refused his money. Why didn't they take it? He wondered. They clearly needed it. He'd seen the frayed cuffs on their sleeves, the way the younger ones' shoes were tearing at the sides. Most people would have grabbed the cash and run. But they didn't. As he drove through the sleeping streets of Atlanta, the skyscrapers glittered against the wet pavement like constellations. The same buildings his company owned, the same skyline his name had helped shape. Normally, that sight filled him with pride, a reminder that he'd built something lasting. Tonight, it only reminded him of how far away he drifted from the kind of decency he'd just witnessed. He reached his penthouse just after midnight. The doorman straightened immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Langston. Shall I send for someone to clean the car?" "No, leave it." His voice was quieter than usual. Inside, the apartment gleamed. Glass walls, marble floors, the scent of leather and expensive silence. But as he shrugged off his damp coat, the emptiness hit harder than usual. The housekeeper had left his usual tray of water and mail on the counter. There was a card from a luxury watch company, another from a law firm. Nothing personal, nothing real. He poured himself a drink and sank into the sofa, watching the city lights shimmer below. He'd spent his life chasing security, luxury, power, but those boys, with nothing but wet shoes and bicycles, had something he didn't. Something that couldn't be bought. He could still hear their voices. "Mama says you help people 'cause it's right, not for pay." The words had no pretension, no agenda. Just truth. He thought of his own mother, years gone now, a waitress who used to press coins into his palm for lunch and tell him, "Be kind, Robbie. You never lose when you give." He had forgotten that somewhere along the way. He set the drink aside, untouched. For the first time in years, he felt restless in his own home. The walls that once represented achievement now felt like barriers. He couldn't shake the thought. Where had those boys gone after helping him? What kind of place did they live in? Did their mother know what kind of young men she'd raised? He imagined her, tired but proud, holding the moral compass that her sons carried so effortlessly. Robert lay awake that night, sleep refusing to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the older boy's face illuminated by that flickering flashlight, calm and certain even in the rain. He wondered what would happen to them. Would they make it out of whatever neighborhood they came from? Or would life grind them down, like it did to so many? By morning, The decision was already made somewhere deep inside him, though he didn't quite understand it yet. When he stepped into his office later that day, his assistant was startled to see him early, tie undone, no trace of his usual arrogance. "Cancel my lunch with the board," he said. "Sir, I've got something more important to do." He didn't explain. He just picked up his car keys again. For once, the meeting could wait. Deals could wait. The world could wait. There was a promise unspoken. A pull toward that forgotten highway, toward two boys whose small act of kindness had cracked open the armor he'd spent decades building. As he drove out of the city, sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the wet asphalt ahead. The world looked cleaner somehow, sharper, as if washed new by the rain. Robert Langston, the man who thought he had everything, was finally beginning to realize what he'd been missing. Robert found the boys 2 days later. It wasn't easy. He'd driven up and down the same stretch of highway where they'd helped him, stopping at gas stations and small stores, asking questions that earned him puzzled looks. Most people didn't recognize his description until a cashier at a rundown corner shop said, "Sounds like the Daniels boys. They live out by Old Pine Road, near the fields." The directions led him down a narrow lane lined with oak trees heavy with moss. It was the kind of place time forgot. Houses slouched under peeling paint, yards cluttered with rusted bikes and worn-out toys. Robert parked the Bentley carefully, feeling the weight of the contrast. His luxury car didn't belong here. Maybe he didn't either. But when he saw the boys' bicycles leaning against a porch, he knew he was in the right place. The door opened before he could knock. The older boy stood there, eyes wide with surprise. For a second, neither of them spoke. "Hey," Robert said, feeling strangely unsure of himself. "You remember me?" The boy's lips twitched into a small smile. "The flat tire man. Yeah, that'd be me." Their mother appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a towel. She was in her mid-30s, maybe younger, though the years had worn fine lines into her face. Her expression was cautious but kind. "Can I help you, sir?" Robert took off his hat, suddenly feeling like a boy being scolded. "Ma'am, your sons helped me the other night. In the rain. I wanted to thank them properly." Her eyes softened. "They told me about that. I told them the Lord brings people together for a reason." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe he does." She invited him in, and he followed into a small living room that smelled faintly of coffee and soap. The furniture was mismatched, the floor creaked, but the space felt lived in, warm in a way his penthouse never did. The younger boy peeked from behind a doorway, grinning. "You found us," he said, like it was a miracle. "I did," Robert said, chuckling. "And I owe you both more than a thank you." They sat together, and Robert told them what had been on his mind since that night. How their words had stuck with him. How, for the first time in years, he'd started to see what real generosity looked like. "You boys didn't just help me with a tire," he said. "You reminded me what being a decent man means." Their mother looked down, clearly moved, but she said quietly, "We just do what we can, sir. The world gives you back what you give it." Robert nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time I gave something back." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. "I did a little digging," he continued gently. "Your mortgage was past due. It's paid off now." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No, you can't, sir. We didn't ask for." He raised a hand, his voice steady. "I know you didn't. That's exactly why I did." The room was silent except for the faint ticking of an old wall clock. The boys looked at each other, stunned. Their mother's lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." "There's more," Robert said softly. "I set up a small trust fund for the boys' education. Enough to see them through college if they want it." The younger one blinked. "College? For real?" Robert smiled. "For real." For the first time in a long time, he felt something lift inside him. Not pride, not relief, but a quiet peace. He hadn't felt that since before his success became a cage. Before he left, the boys ran to show him their backyard, a patch of dirt and grass where they'd built a rickety basketball hoop out of wood scraps. They played for a few minutes, laughing, rainwater from the night before still glinting on the rim. When Robert finally climbed back into his Bentley, the whole family stood waving from the porch. A week later, he held a press conference, not for business, not for profit, but to announce the Daniel's Foundation, a program offering scholarships to children from underprivileged families in the area. When a reporter asked why he'd started it, he told the story exactly as it happened: how two boys stopped to help a stranger on a dark road, expecting nothing, and how that moment changed everything. Success, he said, looking straight into the cameras, means nothing if you forget where you came from, or the people who remind you what goodness looks like. That night, as he drove home, he passed the same stretch of highway. The air was clear, moonlight glowing on the wet asphalt. For the first time, he rolled down the window and just breathed, the sound of frogs and crickets replacing the noise of the city. He thought of the boys again, of their mother's quiet strength, and smiled. Somewhere behind him, their house light was probably still burning. And for once, Robert Langston didn't feel like the richest man in town because of the money he had. He felt rich because two kids in the rain had reminded him how to be human.